Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Ko Monica Briggs toku ingoa. Greetings and a really warm welcome to you all. Thank you so much for joining us and taking this time out of your busy day. And I actually want to start this afternoon by acknowledging you, Stephen. Your Seeds podcasts are an invaluable source of information for those of us that share your interest in empowering impact. And for those of you who don't know Stephen, his contribution to this kaupapa is both personal and professional. Through his work at Parry, he advises clients ranging from startup companies to mature tech companies, investors and social enterprises. And he published a book called Social Enterprises in New Zealand, a Legal Handbook. And very recently, he collaborated on producing a document around purpose-driven structures for impact entrepreneurs in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So it was a pleasure for the Centre for Social Impact, and in particular our associate Chloe Harwood, who's joined us today. We were delighted to work alongside Stephen on this latest publication called An Overview of Impact Investing in Aotearoa. It provides a snapshot of how impact investment is evolving and how it is making a difference both here and internationally. It's a really useful contribution to our understanding of the potential for impact investing, particularly in this sort of post-COVID reimagining time. And it's very much intended as a guide, particularly for people new to this topic. So we hope it's a useful tool to explain to others what this area is all about. I know I get asked increasingly more these days what impact investing is. There are lots of practical resources and links at the end of the short document to help guide people who want to learn more about this space. So thank you so much, Stephen and Chloe, for your work on this. And we included 4 case studies as well to really hear some practical insights on how different organisations are doing this mahi across Aotearoa. Today we have an opportunity to hear a little more from these organisations as they'll be joining Stephen on the panel. The publication wouldn't have been possible without the support from our case study organisations, who are the New Zealand Green Investment Finance, Foundation North, Community Finance and the Tyndall Foundation. Thank you so much for sharing your practical journey and stories in this way with us. So I'll now hand over to Stephen because he'll be facilitating the discussion and he'll be introducing the panel members. So thank you.
Kia ora koto, ko Stephen toku ingoa, no Aotearoa ao, and thank you, Monica, for those kind words of introduction. That was really, nice to hear from you, and thank you for the chance to collaborate on this paper. It's been a real pleasure to work on it the last couple months, and I see Chloe here on the call, so I just want to acknowledge her and all of the work that's gone on behind the scenes. I don't want to count how many emails we've had back and forth. There's anything like this, there's a lot of behind the scenes work. So thank you, Chloe, for all that you've done, and to CSI for being willing to do this collaboration. So, right, what we want to do is actually make this quite practical. We want to hear perspectives of people who are involved in this sector and actually getting on and doing the impact investing, because in previous panels and things, we've kind of talked at a higher level about what is impact investing. But in this case, I'm really hoping we can get into some of the more practical side of things, because it's not a theoretical concept. It's actually happening right now. And I think that's, if you take nothing else away, hopefully that will be the message that you get, is that this isn't some new thing that has never been done. It's actually happening right now here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So to do that, we've got some wonderful input to be had from several people who are on this call. And what I'm going to do is ask each of them just to really briefly thumbnail sketch the organization that they're from and their role within it. And then we're going to just get into some back and forth discussion. It's going to be very organic. We don't have an agenda. We're not trying to cover this or that. And so in that spirit, we all know how to use chat functions. So if you have a question for a particular person or a bigger picture or a comment, doesn't really matter, feel free to use the chat and drop it in. And if it's a specific question for someone, then put their name so that we know who it's for. And we'll let people speak, and then we'll come back to those questions and we'll take it from there. Yeah, so we'll get underway, and because in my screen, Paul is next to me. Paul Gilberd from Community Finance, do you mind just giving an intro to yourself, some of the work that you're doing? And the disclaimer I have to give here is that I'm actually the chair of Community Finance. So just so people know, I'm involved in that organization as well. But Paul, do you want to lead us off, and then we'll just go around and each of you can say a very quick overview intro.
Kia ora koutou. Good to see you wearing a tie, Stephen. Thank you for raising the standard for all of us in terms of business attire. So I'm the General Manager here at Community Finance. We began a year ago as a direct response to a systemic issue that we saw, particularly initially in the social impact space, with regards to the housing crisis, where there was a role and a gap for a financial intermediary to assist with matching ethical money with registered community housing providers who have a very good, strong record of proven solutions delivery. And so really, the way I describe who we are and what we do as an organisation is a village wine press or a communal asset, where we are simply assisting the known reputable registered community housing providers at this stage to get access to low-cost construction finance on terms that work for them to increase the supply of affordable housing. So that's our first project that we're up and running with. It's a social impact project initially, but we will be moving very shortly into the environmental space also.
Great, thank you so much. And maybe Rangimarie, do you mind giving a little intro? And I'm really hoping as well that we get some input from you on the papers which have come out, which have been really helpful from the Connective. Could you give us a little overview of yourself? Thank you.
Kia ora koutou, ko Rangimarie tōku ingoa. He uri ahau o te Aotearoa nui a paparangi whakatohia me ngai taiki tōrere. So, kia ora everyone, I'm Rangimarie, and from down the Wanganui River and out to the east coast towards Opotiki. But I'm actually sitting here in Paradise, which is just north of Whangarei. So I'm the one of the principals of the Connective, and I guess what the Connective is actually we're systems activists, and what we're passionate about is affecting systems change and the mindsets of people with the way that they choose to invest their effort and time in a way that actually supports the growing an economy or community that serves thriving ecosystems. And societies that are just and resilient and inclusive. So in a nutshell, that's what we do. But yes, Stephen's right, we've recently just released tikanga-led guides to impact investing, and that comes off work that that I've done previously with Taitokera Iwi. But really the point of those guidelines is really to support the body of practice on impact investing, but investing specifically, so that it supports better investment decision making, because there's a better understanding of the balance between financial, social, environmental and cultural values. So kia ora everyone.
Kia ora, thank you, Rangimarie. And if you do nothing else, can I encourage you to download the papers that are mentioned, because I found them really, really helpful. And in fact, I think Koyu and I were really relieved when they came out, because they dealt with this subject so well in terms of tikanga-led investment that we had thought, how are we going to do this in our paper? And fortunately, they came out. So we were able to just have, if you look in there, we've just got a cross-reference over to say, look, here's where you need to go for this. So I was really pleased about that. I think we'll turn now. Liam, do you mind giving us an overview from you? Thank you.
No, not at all. Ko Liam Sheridan toku ingoa. I know quite a number of people on the call, so great to see you again. I should say that on page 10 of the CSI publication is the case study that's been prepared by my colleague Eve Jolly, who is really the driving force of impact investment in the foundation, and I certainly acknowledge her who she isn't here today, but I acknowledge all the work she's done. I mean, very briefly, we've sort of gone on a bit of a journey from a couple of years ago. We were at Foundation North, we decided, and I'm sorry, I said this in the last of these teleconferences, and it is a bit of a cliche, that we should be using our balance sheet as well as our income and expenditure account to do the work that we want to do. And Chloe Harwood, who's one of the authors of the report, was instrumental in that sort of pivot. And we've had some good learnings along the way, and I also acknowledge Yanti, who helped us in what we described at the time as a scout role, trying to find some opportunities, and there were some very good learnings there about the, maybe Yanti would like to comment later, but about the difficulties and the challenges of building the pipeline for impact investing. But we do say that we're a learning organisation, and so we did have some good learnings from that. Other than that, I'll probably refer you to Eve's case study. It's a great summary of where we've got to. Currently, we are looking to work with the Connective to set up a fund which will incorporate the Indigenous approaches that Rangimarie mentioned, and to, importantly for us, will also incorporate some of the key focus areas that Foundation North has for its granting activities. So we hope that one will complement the other. But happy to discuss any aspect of that.
That's great, thank you. And yeah, a big acknowledgement to the people who contributed to the paper, who provided the case studies but aren't able to make the call. So John McCarthy from Tyndall Foundation was the one who provided us that content, but wasn't able to make this particular timing of the call. Last up, Jenny, if you don't mind giving an overview, that'd be great.
Kia ora, Stephen. Can you hear me? Hi, everyone. My name's Jenny Lackey, and I'm Head of Communications for New Zealand Green Investment Finance. Originally, as a policy initiative, we were the Green Investment Fund, but now we've been established as a Crown-owned private company established by the Crown to accelerate investments in New Zealand's low carbon future. As an organisation, we've been in the investment market for about a year, and we have 3 investments that are intended to demonstrate to the financial markets in particular what is possible in low carbon investment. And what is possible I can talk more about, but really as a company we have 4 key objectives. Obviously we are trying to make investments that accelerate emissions reductions, and that can be both things that directly reduce emissions, but also things that enable New Zealand's decarbonisation journey. So we've got quite a broad mandate there. We have to invest on a commercial basis and get a return, and we want to unlock private capital and finally show the market what's possible. So very climate focused, unlike many of you that have a broad mandate, but we've got a big enough problem to solve.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. Well, I think we will come back to you because I'm really curious about some of the investments that you've made and just the process of how you've found what to invest in, you know, because there's multiple, I guess the thing is there's multiple impacts that you're seeking, isn't it? It's not just financial return, it's some other outcomes as well. So what we're going to do is have a discussion now, and we're going to go on different tangents and different topics. So feel free to put in questions into the chat. But before we get into that, I'd just like to ground it a little bit by turning back to you, Rangimarie. And if it's okay, can you just outline some of the key points from your perspective that came through in your report? Just from a tikanga-led impact investment, I think people on the call would be really curious about that. And I know, yeah, I would certainly be interested to hear some of your perspective of, you know, summarizing some of the key things, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. I guess what would help to start with then, Stephen, is just to sort of understand the whakapapa of why iwi chose to embark upon creating this impact investment platform that they have, which was Te Paeroa Tika. And a lot of that actually came from the fact that I guess we look at the world in a different way, and our decisions are driven by values that have been handed down to us and ancestral wisdom that's thousands of years old. And despite what's happened in the last 200 years, it's part of our DNA and part of what identifies what good looks like for us, if we are to determine what success as Māori looks like. So that's sort of where it came from. And with our economic growth strategy that we had put out, we were finding it really difficult to have investment conversations. And these tikanga-led impact investment guidelines are actually not just about impact investment, it's just about how Māori invest. This is how we look at the world, is that we understand that everything is interconnected and that nothing exists on its own, so that we understand there is a symbiotic relationship between people and the planet and people between each other. And it's about articulating and looking at everything in the world based around that sort of understanding. So the reason why we shifted to create Te Paeroa Tika o Te Taitokero, which is what Transforming Taitokero for Good, the impact investment platform, is called nowadays. And I must give a big mihi to Jody Kere Tabua, who is the CEO, and I've stepped away from that role about 6 months ago. But our decision to do this was driven by this, and this, I think, are really good principles around if we're doing impact investment around the environment or around, and you're wanting to drive social good and so forth, as well as have it wash its face or to return commercial value, is that we wanted to shift away from Māori being the end users or beneficiaries of this investment to actually being the co-owners or co-investors. We wanted to shift away from investment where the programs were being done to our community rather than being done by our community or done by Māori. We wanted to move away from a footprint or fingerprints that were exploitative and exclusionary to ones that were inclusive and revolved around the well-being as Māori. We wanted to move away actually from carbon zero and beyond that to regeneration. And that lines up with our kaitiakitanga responsibilities. And then we also wanted to move away from the fact that a lot of these investments have short-term and limited impact to ones that have intergenerational and large-scale impact. So they needed to be transformative. And also to move away from siloed or poorly targeted approaches to ones that considered a whole of systems approach. And it leveraged really the goodness that sits inside most ecosystems. Everybody's trying to do really good stuff, but we're all operating in silos. And it's about taking a more collaborative approach so that everybody's leveraging the good of a joined up and blended investment along a pipeline of goodness that you're basically creating in order to be transformative. So, and that really is what led us to create the platform. The guidelines are really how we were initially to support other Māori or iwi organisations take their tikanga or what's their values and what's important to them to define what good looks like. And then how do you translate that and embed it and normalise it across the whole DNA of your strategic vision, the investment decisions that you make, your execution and how you measure it. Because sometimes most of your good ideas sit up as bold visions and everyone just gets on with their work and practice actually hasn't changed. So tikanga, a lot of that also has to do with actually the behavioural and the mindset change that needs to happen and the accountability at the end of it to actually be honest about whether or not you delivered on what you're after. So those are the kind of the rationale behind those guidelines and just sort of supporting that kind of discipline inside iwi Māori organisations. But the other part of that too is an understanding that the ecosystem would love to engage on and actually take advantage of this knowledge that's available for all New Zealand. It's an Aotearoa intellect. And so just to get an initial understanding of that, that you might want to, you know, pick up or build understanding if you are impact investors and designing funds and doing good stuff. Yeah.
That's really great. Thank you so much. And we've done another one of these before, and that was the thing that came, that the point that really stuck with me was the fact that this is not something new. You know, from a Te Ao Māori perspective, it's been about kaitiakitanga and stewardship, and I think there's a lot that we can learn. I'd like to turn, if it's okay, to Liam and just ask you, because we've heard that grounding there from Rangimarie's perspective, but I am really curious about you and particularly Foundation North, which is a large entity. How has it been in terms of shifting gears or shifting focus to move from maybe a traditional role of grants and, you know, and getting funds out to groups that way, to having a different conception around, well, we could do impact investing? Because I think I see you as a leader in this, and I think if others can look to you and say, well, if they can do it, we can do it. So I'm just curious about your journey there. If you could describe it a little bit. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, they're very kind words, and I, you know, accept them graciously. Although I would refer people to Bay Trust as well, who on a somewhat smaller scale than we've got planned have been doing impact investing for some years now, primarily in the housing market, but nevertheless they have. So great to acknowledge Alistair Rhodes. I mean, I guess the reality is, and Chloe of all people will acknowledge this, we have had a lot of conversations over a very long period about the concept of impact investing. And I know, I mean, I've been at the organisation for 4 years, but I know that the conversations have gone on before that time. And I mean, to be honest, society, somebody earlier mentioned the context around us. Society has changed as well. And so trustees and others have watched what's going on around them, around the world, in other parts of the country, and it starts to become normalised, the idea that you can do good with your investing portfolio as well as grants. And so there is but however, not wanting to break the link between the two. I mean, we do have a sort of a presumption, although not absolutely obligatory, that, you know, the focus areas for impact investing should be the same focus areas for that we grant. So improved social equity, social inclusion for marginalised groups, whoever they may be. Now there can and will be exceptions to that, but I mean, we really felt, for example, that the Salvation Army bond, you know, was a great something that really strongly linked our granting and the investment concept. And I think in her commentary in the publication, Eve commented that the Salvation Army has also been a grantee of the foundation in the past. So I don't think it's something that you can, never having discussed it before, I don't think it's something that you can take to your governors one day and just expect them to, I guess, see the light overnight. You know, you do need to do the groundwork, and especially if, as in our case, we have made a deliberate policy to take a sort of concessionary return in terms of what our expectations are for our impact investing, and we acknowledge that not everyone takes that approach, and ours wouldn't necessarily be the right way to go for all parties. So I guess in some ways we're fortunate to have the ability to take that longer term perspective and appreciate that not everybody can. I hope that's been helpful.
Yeah, I think it is helpful. And the point that I'm really trying to make is, and you're absolutely right, there's others out there who've done impact investing and we acknowledge them, but also just the process to go from not having done it to doing it. I think it's really helpful to hear those stories, to be able to then encourage others. And I know there's a lot out there who have funds in term deposits where they're making nominal amounts of interest rates and the profits are going to Australian banks. And
yeah, well, we have, just as a bit of background, we have made a 2% allocation to impact investment from our investment portfolio. So as things stand, that's about $30 million. And we made a deliberate decision based partly on advice, again, from Alistair Rhodes. Well, why don't you take it from your cash allocation, which is returning, as you have correctly said, Stephen, pretty poor, pretty low returns. So there can be no question that in putting money into impact investment, the trustees are in any way breaching their fiduciary duties. In fact, if the returns work as low as the target is, if the returns work as expected, it will still be better than the cash allocation from which the funds have been taken. So, things like that do need to be carefully thought through. And once again, I acknowledge Alistair for his guidance on that.
Oh, that's really helpful. Thank you. So I'm going to turn to Jenny in a minute just to hear another perspective of an investor and how they go about finding deals. But before Jenny, just Paul, I'm curious about your perspective because you received funds from Foundation North. So just hearing that perspective from Liam, can you give us your perspective as one of the entities that's been involved in facilitating that? Like, what are some of the things that you're seeing?
Yeah, it's been a really rich experience throughout the last 12 months, and we've actually seen quite significant movement within and development of the market within those 12 months since we started out. So where we really began the journey with the first product, which was the $40 million raise for the Salvation Army Community Bond, we really kickstarted that with the traditional philanthropic trusts and foundations where there was a predisposition to impact first and an allowance within the existing structures in terms of SIPOs or deeds of trusts to allow that sort of activity. And what we've seen as we've progressed from those initial investors who really tried to catalyse and activate the market by going in first is a growing movement across what one could consider some of the more ultra-conservative manifestations of trusts and such like. So we're doing a lot of work, for example, with church property trustees. We had a group in the office this morning. And it's really interesting because they typically are perhaps more down the conservative end of the spectrum, and they're more constrained by their trust deeds and by their SIPOs and have less leeway within which to operate in terms of stepping into the impact investment space. And so as part of another working group that I'm on, one of the things we've been doing is testing that legally and getting legal opinions on that. So how far can you push your SIPO or your existing structures before you are deemed to be stepping outside of the safe lanes of fiduciary duty? And the number that seems to have been landed on most commonly is around 5% at this point in time, so, which is interesting. And so we're leaning hard into that, particularly in the church context where they're, just in the three big traditional churches, there's 10 billion in assets in New Zealand, for example, and they're saying we want to do more, but we're constrained by our own rules and our own deeds and our own investment statements and such like. Can you help us expand the definition of fiduciary duty to align with our mission and vision and purpose? And so what we've seen happen is growth and a widening of the definition of fiduciary duty, which is really exciting. And what has happened in parallel with that is the flow of capital. And so then more recently, as many of you will be aware, thanks Liam, because the journey through Foundation North was observed by a number of players, particularly in the market, and they were like, oh, that's interesting, Foundation North as a big player is in. And then through other relationships, that's unlocked the scale of the investment market, which manifested in over $20 million investment from a KiwiSaver fund. So that was the first major institutional investment. And that was out of their fixed interest allocation. So within their portfolio of 1.8 billion, they had an allocation for fixed interest, and they allocated some of that fixed interest into this impact investment, which was interesting because it got them a better financial return than they were getting on other things. So it was a triple win for everybody, including the households who now have homes because they were homeless before. So really interesting, just in 12 months to see quite a shift, both in the philanthropic impact first market, but also in the commercial market. And obviously the prevailing market conditions with interest rates being so low has helped us enormously in terms of getting momentum into the impact investment space that we're operating in.
That's really helpful. Thank you. I don't know if I think it's public, isn't it? The Anglican impact investing report, Paul? Maybe if it is,
yeah.
You could put it in the chat maybe, because that's a really good, interesting, just for the people on the call, they may not have heard that perspective from I guess a religious perspective, that because it goes into a lot of detail, Yep.
Happy to share.
Cool. I think people would find that really helpful, because obviously, as you point out, there's several billions that is in bank accounts and property and various other things. Yeah, no, that's helpful. And just to just in case people are curious, that $40 million, that first round is now finished with the Salvation Army. So what we're doing at Community Finance is looking to actually go out now to regions and seeing if there's particularly regions that we could do smaller funds and partner with local people. So for example, in Christchurch or in Waikato or wherever it might be. So yeah. All right. Well, Jenny, I'd really be keen on your perspective, coming as somebody, because you're actually going out, you've actually made some significant investments. Yeah, just feel free to take this question wherever you want to go. Open question. How has that been in terms of finding projects? And yeah, curious to hear from you.
Thank you, Stephen. I guess I'll take the opportunity to do a bit of a storytelling piece on NZGIF. So as I've said, we have those 4 objectives: emissions, getting a commercial return, crowding in private capital, and showing the markets what's possible. And within that, we have a huge amount of flexibility to act as a direct investor in the climate change space. So the ability to invest, debt, equity, or hybrids of, and other financial instruments, whatever sort of suits us at the time. So our first year was about getting into the market, establishing a market presence. And we have 5 very clear target sectors. You may be aware that New Zealand's emissions profile is very different from those offshore. So offshore green banks are largely sort of debt financing renewables, but we have the mandate to look at, transport, the built environment, agriculture, process heat's a big problem in New Zealand, coal use. So some of those areas are more advanced than others, technologically. So I'll describe our 3 current investments because I think it demonstrates the flexibility of what we're able to achieve in this market. And really what we're looking at now that we've made these early investments is scaling them up. So if you've read the case studies, you'll see that our first investment was a 15 million green credit facility for Centreport, Wellington's port here. And that's, as far as investment goes, incredibly vanilla. But what it enabled Centreport to do was to accelerate their low carbon activities. Post the Kaikoura earthquake in 2016, the port was damaged and they've got $600 million to spend on regeneration. But they wanted to also do low carbon stuff, and our credit facility enables that stuff to be sped up. So they've done some electric vehicles, which I can't wait to see. They'll be on the ground in January. They've done a road to rail project, which takes thousands of truck trips off the rimatakas. So benefits not just emissions, but in terms of road safety and sort of social license to operate in the port. So they're telling us that it's been really important to their staff to be part of a low carbon business. Our next investment was an equity investment in a tiny Internet of Things business in New Zealand, basically as growth capital. People ask me, how does an Internet of Things provider reduce emissions? But what it does, it's called Thinkstra, it enables people with assets to very cheaply and efficiently track their assets, and that results in much less transport trips. So the example I like to use is Christchurch City used to furnish a small community with water through water trucks, and they basically just sent the trucks out on a rotation. Now they know when the tanks need filling, and they've reduced their truck transport over to Aotearoa by 50%. So we're excited about the multiple sectors where asset owners can track their assets and reduce the need to send people and trucks out to service them. And then the third is a hybrid investment. So we've made an equity investment in a holding company that has two subsidiaries. One is called Carbon. Check them out if you're a fleet owner. They do fleet optimization and transition to electric vehicle planning. They'll assist a fleet owner to do that effectively and also get their people comfortable with electric vehicles. And then on the other side is Sustainable Fleet Finance, where we've given a $5 million debt facility for them to finance and actually own electric vehicles for fleet owners. So hopefully those kinds of opportunities demonstrate sort of what's possible, and the listeners, there's lots of stuff to do out there, especially in climate.
Oh, that's very helpful. Thank you. Yeah, I think what I'd like to do now is open it up to the panelists to give us some comments on basically anything that you want, but maybe thinking about some of the challenges, some of the hurdles, some of the learnings that you've had in getting into this area, because the point of this call is really not all of us have been involved in this sector, so it's really want to keep it practical and proactive and helpful for people who are listening either on the call or watching the video later. And also, if you are here, feel free to put questions into the chat as well. I see we've got a few comments there. Paul, thank you for putting the link into the Anglican Church document, and Lina, thank you for your comment as well. And Liam, that's a question that you've put in. So yeah, but do any of you panelists, do you have any other, I guess, really broadly speaking, any thoughts or comments for people listening about how you found it in terms of impact investing and what other people might need to know or want to know?
I'd love to back up John McCarthy's comment in the report, if in the sense that he said this is already happening. Let's bust the myth that impact investment is something that's not actually already happening, because certainly, although we've started off in the social impact space as community finance, we are absolutely overwhelmed with beautiful mana enhancing project opportunities across the whole of Aotearoa. There is no shortage of investment opportunities, and it's really just matching the money up with those opportunities that is the key task for us at this point in time. So just wanted to sort of shout out to support the point that John made in his report.
Stephen, I guess I could leap in here and absolutely endorse what Paul said. Even though we have a slightly different lens on investment, we're experiencing the same thing. And I guess what NZGIF is here to do is join those dots. There's no lack of will, but people have narrow mandates on the investment side and struggle sometimes to match up what their goals are or their desire to invest with the investees, who similarly don't necessarily know how to package up their opportunities for the investment market. So we're experiencing not a dearth of opportunities, but just perhaps a mismatch between the investment community and the opportunities. And it's really about joining those dots. And at the moment, those dots are being joined by you know, building relationships and talking to people in the investment community.
I wondered if I could jump in here too. I guess one of the learning points that we've made, and this actually builds on the point that Paul made around it being mana enhancing, is that if we are actually designing funds and their purpose is to create social or environmental value or cultural value as well as commercial value, a consideration to make is that when you're actually designing those funds, that you're actually not designing in the systemic barriers that are actually perpetuating the problems you're actually trying to resolve in the first place, and to be really intentional and hold the mirror to yourself about whether or not you're actually designing out those very behaviours that have made it difficult for those communities to access the investment that they're after. The other mindset change, maybe it's a provocation, is this. And it comes actually from that link you've just sent through, Paul. Thank you very much. And I'm going to take one of the quotes that are on there, that money is not morally neutral. It can do harm and it can do good. And that's a saying by Archbishop Justin Welby. And when we're talking about impact investment and that, you know, if we're just carving off a little bit to have a go at impact investment, consider what you're doing with the remainder of your investment. You're actually asking a little piece of money to do far more work than you're actually asking the bulk of your money to do. And ask yourself this question: which one's going to be far more commercial? The one that can actually provide you this sort of level of financial return and all of these other benefits, or one that just washes its face? Because those are the sorts of accountability measures that we have as Māori about whether or not we've actually been responsible with the resources that we've been given the stewardship over for the time, for the season that they're in our hands, sort of thing. And so that's kind of the mind shift, or the challenge, that I guess the provocation I'm putting out here about what's actually really commercial, what's actually delivering, you know, value across the whole spectrum. And maybe that's the challenge we need to have about mainstreaming this kind of principled way of using money. Yeah.
That's great. I love those provocations. It's so important. And actually, that's one of the reasons that we did the report, why we're doing a call like this, because we actually want to have these discussions to get people thinking. Because I completely agree with you. What if we weren't talking about 1% or 2%? What if we were talking about 50% or 70%? You know, like, it would just be such a big game changer. If there's no lack of projects that we know will have social impacts, then, you know, we need to change the vocabulary. And hopefully COVID has taught us that we can do things differently and that we could actually move forward quicker than we had thought. My big fear is that build back better becomes we build back to what we have always been. And in fact, this is the perfect opportunity to embrace new conceptions and new ways of doing things. So yeah, thank you. I really appreciate your insights and words. Yeah, so pop any questions in the chat. If there's not lots of questions, that's fine. I think this has been a really helpful session just to talk about things. Do any of you panelists have any other thoughts that you'd like to share? Liam, you haven't spoken again since you first chatted. If you have anything to say, then you're welcome to.
No, I mean, the provocation is maybe possibly directed at Foundation North, and that's fine. I mean, the one thing I would say is that we're just, we're finding our way. I mean, one thing that might actually be worth mentioning is that when we put the 2% recommendation up to our trustees, they were very keen to double it immediately. So, I mean, I think there is a will and an openness in the world, even at community trusts, dare I say it. So people do recognise the responsibilities that they have and are keen to. My sense of our trustees and others is that they are keen to fully participate.
Liam, not aiming at you at all. Actually, it was interesting. The conversation this morning, just to give some context, was targeting church trustees,
Right.
and it was themselves. It was them targeting themselves. Just so you know, one of the authors of that report, which I've shared, is John Whitehead, who was the head of the New Zealand Treasury for many years, and he's one of the leaders in this space because he's also the chairman of the Wellington Diocesan Trust Board. And so he's leading the charge in terms of testing those parameters to try and transform his own organisation from within.
Yes, it's very interesting. I mean, I'm sure when I look at the names on the call, I'm sure most of us will have seen David Carrington speak on his various trips to New Zealand. And of course, he's done so much, or he and his colleagues, of course, have done so much work on this issue of fiduciary responsibilities, and has almost flipped it on its head in a way, in terms of if you're not looking at this stuff now, then actually arguably you're then in breach of your duties. And that was one of the questions, and it may have been missed. I was and the same challenge is open to the 5%, but Paul, I was wondering if that figure of 5% has been influenced in any way by the new Trusts Act, or whether...
Yeah, so that's the piece of work that's ongoing, which John Whitehead is tracking closely as part of the small working group that wrote that report. There's been no sort of fixed determination yet, but there's a growing body of case law across the Commonwealth that is relevant to this space that we're discussing in terms of the redefinition of mission-aligned or purpose-aligned fiduciary duty along the lines of the sort of stuff that David Carrington and it's Big Society Capital, isn't it? Or
yeah,
the lead that they've been sort of taking from the UK perspective. So watch this space. I think it's going to be a case law development, but certainly a growing number of people leaning really hard into that.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, it's really good. Well, thank you everybody for contributing. And I think, I don't mean to target anybody. It's more of a bigger picture thing. It's more of a, one day, wouldn't it be nice if we didn't, people will watch this video maybe in 10 or 20 years and go, they were so at the beginning stages. And I think for Chloe and I, because we did quite a bit of work organizing this, like our intent is that this document that we help prepare will become outdated very quickly, because it will just be mainstreamed, and people will, of course, what you invest in will have positive impacts with it. And so I guess what we're hoping is that we have this new conception of reality, which embraces things like social enterprise and benefit corporations. And it's all symptoms to me of a bigger paradigm shifts of thinking that are going on and moving us forward. So this call is an example of one particular area that we're talking about, but actually it's happening across many different things. And if you go to employ a new graduate and you get to the end of the interview, they're probably not going to ask you, do I get a company car? They're probably going to ask you, how is my work going to have meaning or impact in the world, which I take a lot of heart from. We're actually quite lucky because we got somebody on the video who I know separately, named Lina Green, and she's been doing a lot of work in restorative finance. So I just messaged her briefly and said if she would mind giving us her perspective. So she's not based here in New Zealand, and since she's on the call, I think it would be really interesting to hear her perspective. So Lina, I'll just pass it over to you to briefly introduce yourself and just give us a comment to provoke us to think about another aspect of what we're talking about.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Yeah. So I run an organization called Angels of Impact, and have been in this area of impact investing. And I just wanted to say that Rangimarie, what you had presented is actually very cutting edge. People who've been, one book I'd strongly recommend everybody read, two books actually. One is Winner Takes All from Anand Giridas, who basically shows you that impact investing is broke when it comes to systemic change issues. It perpetuates racism and structural racism. The other one is Decolonizing Wealth, a book by Edgar Villanueva. He's a Native American. And this thinking is catching up now. So much so that impact investing is now being challenged as to whether or not it is the right thing. So here, if you have a model that Rangimarie is already putting forward, the equivalent model that's happening in the US is a model of restorative finance, being promoted by Nwamaka Akbo, and I gave the link on the site too. And restorative finance is actually going at the systemic issues. And therefore, you're looking at you're digging a little deeper. Who's the money flowing to? How's the money flowing? What are the terms? Are the terms extractive? Is the metric determined by the community or the investor? So you're going very much deeper. And those questions that Rangimarie asked, like if only a small percentage is for impact investing, what's happening on the other money, right? So it really questions it. And it sounds to me that if you have models that are developing using a Maori methodology, you actually have an opportunity to be leading the space in thinking, and just, I would strongly recommend, please don't use the word impact investing if you can. So that's just me.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. Yeah, it's wonderful to hear different perspectives. And I know that you've been involved around the world, so it's good to have that insight. So we've been getting to know each other through something called the Edmund Hillary Fellowship, which is bringing together actually hundreds of entrepreneurs, investors, and people from across the world, all focused on Aotearoa and making change here that will be an example to the rest of the world. So yeah, it's a really cool initiative, and I'm glad that you could share a little bit with us. Lina, thank you for that. So I think what we'll do is finish up, but what I would like to encourage you to do is to keep your eye out, watch out for further things. I know there's different people writing things out there. If you're not aware, there's the Impact Investing Network, which is a New Zealand-based group, and I think David Woods is on or has been on, involved in that. And the point is that there's quite a lot going on in this area here in Aotearoa. And the more that we can network and talk across silos and make sure that we're hearing perspectives, so that, that Jenny maybe would catch up with Paul, about, because we've got housing focus and we've got, green investment focus, and well, actually, maybe we're talking about the same thing anyway. So I just encourage us on this call to really connect with each other, resource each other, support each other. I know there's a relatively small number on this call, but I view each of you as catalysts within your organizations, within society itself, to help usher in this sort of new way of thinking. And this is just one example. So yeah, encourage you, if you're not connected, get out and connect with some of these organizations. Thank you, David. Yeah, John McCarthy, who contributed to the papers, on the advisory board, and Rangimarie and David are as well. So I know they're putting out materials. The other thing, this is just a selfish request, but a paper like that one that brought you to this call, it's a lot of work to put those together, and then it's quite a lot of work to get it out further. So if you would be willing to take the link and post about it or share it with other people, that would be great, because as we know, hopefully it's something that's of benefit to people, and certainly we will tell our networks, but we don't know the people that you know. I know this is really obvious, but sometimes I feel like it's good to at least have made the ask. So if you're willing to post about it on LinkedIn or other platforms, then we can help. And again, the purpose of the paper was to educate people who really have no concept of what it is that we're talking about, and giving them practical case studies to say, yes, this is actually happening. Yeah, and I will be posting the audio up later as a video, and so you'll be able to share that as well, because I think this has been a really deep conversation, and I'll try and put it out as a Seeds episode as well. And that's an initiative that Monica mentioned at the start, that I've now done 231 episodes, all focused on this: what could the world look like, interviewing entrepreneurs and kind of thought leaders across New Zealand. So if you're, yeah, it'd be great to, if you're interested, explore the back catalog, because there's a lot of content there now. Yeah, and I just want to say thank you to all of the panelists. We really appreciate your insights. It's a Friday afternoon, and we know you took time out to do this. So Thank you to Paul, Jenny, Rangimarie, Liam, and also to Raina for jumping in there as well. And thank you to Monica. Thank you to CSI for all the support in pulling the paper together. And hope you have a good rest of your day and a great weekend. So thanks, everybody.